Well, well, well. Looked like our boy had a small hiccup. Is he gonna continue to try and get back to some normalcy? Let's find out. I woke up the next morning feeling like I had slept on a concrete floor. I forced myself out of bed and went into the bathroom. Today, I get to see Jean, and I smiled and did a little dance as I walked through the bathroom door. I stood in front of the sink and saw my reflection in the mirror. Bloody hell, I looked like a skeleton with eyes. I opened the faucet and splashed water on my face. The cold liquid ran down my skin, waking me up, and with a spring in my step, I began to get ready to go meet Jean. By the time I finished taking a shower and got dressed, I was feeling much better, singing as I walked out of the bathroom. I went downstairs and into the living room and turned on my stereo. They were playing one of my favorite Peter Tosh songs. I went into the kitchen, singing along to the lyrics. I looked at my watch and saw that it was almost 10 o'clock. The sun shined through the window in the kitchen, leaving a smoky golden trail from the window to the kitchen counter. I opened the fridge and took out a sapodilla fruit and bit into it. The juice ran through my fingers and dripped onto the floor. I did not stop to clean it up. I mean, who cares? I was going to go see Jean. The beat in the song stopped, and I stopped with it. And when it started back, I jumped and twisted my body. Yes, life will be like a bed of roses today. I walked out the door and headed to the beach. Jean was already sitting on the sand waiting for me. She looked up and saw me, and that beautiful smile spread across her face. I tingled all over as she reached out and took my hand. I pulled she up and our bodies bumped as we almost fell over. She laughed. She had twirling around her neck. "So what do you have in plan for today?" she asked, looking into my eyes. I beamed, staring into the sparkling hazel globes. "I know a spot where no one else goes. We can go there and have a nice, quiet afternoon." She squeezed my hand, sending what felt like small electric shocks through me. "Are you doing okay this morning?" she asked, looking at me with some concern. "I'm doing much better right now," I said, swinging she hand. She pulled me towards she and kissed me, she lips tasting like bubblegum. They were warm and soft, and I closed my eyes trying to savor the moment. We came to the dirt wood where I was last night, and I felt a little uneasy remembering the Diablesse. "Where is this place?" she said, jolting me out of my thoughts. "You will see. I think you will love it." We reached the place where the ocean was crashing against the rocks and the blue water disappeared into the sky in the distance. She stopped and looked around. To the left of us was a grassy field, the blades almost as tall as she was. The field slanted downwards to a small beach where a flock of birds floated by on the water just below us. Jen let go of my hand and ran down the beach. The sand here was not as white as the other beaches. It sparkled black and grey, and there were small seashells stuck in the grains. I watched as she ran, her hair bouncing from side to side. Man, she had some silky hair. She turned around, moving backwards. "Come on," she shouted, and I followed she. She started to sing an old country song by Glenn Campbell, and I joined in. She stopped and looked at me, surprised. "How do you know that song?" she asked, looking at me. "My parents love country music. My mom used to sing them to me when I was little." She smiled and took my hand and began singing again, and we walked down the beach, sometimes stumbling over the woods. She laughed. It was melodic, sending more tingles through me. Man, I tell you what, if I tingled anymore, my body would have exploded. We got to the end of the beach. Rocks jutted out into the ocean and the water foamed around them, creating a kaleidoscope of dark green, dark blue, and black. She jumped onto one of the rocks, determined to see what was on the other side. I followed her as she jumped into the sea. The water was waist deep and she struggled to go around the rocks. She stopped, realizing that there were more rocks on the other side, so she turned around and waded back to me. I took she hand and pulled she out of the swollen tide. She blue running shorts clung to she upper thigh. She came back onto the beach and I wrapped my arm around she as she giggled and tilted her head back. Her body was warm against me like a blanket on a cold day. She wrapped one of she perfectly shaped legs around the back of my leg, leaning back like a merengue dancer. I placed the palm of my hand on she back so she don't fall over. Her hair hung loosely, swinging gently in the breeze. She pulled herself back up, looking into my eyes, still giggling, and we began to walk back to the field where the grass was dancing in the wind. I found a clear patch in the tall blades where the sand was white and soft and sat down. She sat with her legs drawn up to her chest, looking out at the ocean, her eyes wide open with amazement. "You love the ocean, don't you?" I asked. "Yeah, but I love the mountains too." Then she began to tell me about her home. The big mountains and the green landscapes ran for miles, the rolling hills that looked like giant waves against the late afternoon skies. Snow-covered mountains, brown, yellow, and orange leaves on lawns in the fall. Coal miners coming home covered with coal dust. They were hard-working people, them West Virginians. She told me about the small town where she went to the university, the river that separates Ohio from West Virginia and Kentucky, the trains that ran through the middle of the town at rush hours. The city was called Huntington, a small town in comparison to the big cities she had been in America. I listened without interrupting. I had been to America before, but I had only been to the large cities. A rowboat went by on the mildly choppy sea. The fisherman waved at us, a big smile on his face. I lay down on my back, trying to picture she descriptions in my head. She looked at me, her eyes squinting as she spoke. "What did you study in London?" she asked. "English, with an emphasis on creative writing," I replied. "Do you write poetry?" she asked, and I sat up. "Yeah, but I have not written anything in a long time." "I would love to read them someday," she said, and I shook my head smiling at her. We looked at each other, not saying a word, for about 10 seconds. Then she took my hand in hers and leaned her head on my shoulder. She raised back up and was about to ask me another question when a yellow and blue butterfly swooped out of the grass and landed on her left knee. She let go of my hand and sat staring at it, then slowly stretched her arms out, her palms up, and used her forefinger to brush the butterfly into it. I lay back down watching her hair. It was a mixture of black and dark brown that cascaded in small waves down the middle of her back. She moaned in disappointment as the butterfly flew off the palm of her hand and disappeared into the grass. I rose up, resting all my weight on my left elbow. "Why don't you walk into the grass and shake it?" I said. She looked at me, a questioning expression on her face. "Go ahead. You will really enjoy it," I said, and she got up and walked about 10 yards into the grass. She shook the grass and butterflies fluttered into the air surrounding she. Blue, green, orange, multicolored butterflies made the grass shimmer in the sunlight. Man, you should have heard the squeals of delight as they glided around she, tickling she skin. I sat watching. I was smiling so much my cheeks began to ache a little. After about 5 minutes, the butterflies began to settle down. She walked back to me and sat down giggling. I lay back down on the sand and we sat in silence. She looked back at me and then lay down next to me, resting her leg across my body. She reached out with her hand, caressing my face, and I closed my eyes for a second, enjoying the soft touch of her fingers. I opened my eyes again to see she smiling at me. Then she leaned over and kissed me. Ah, yes. There was that bubble gum taste again. We kissed for what seemed like an eternity, stopping when we heard giggling. I looked over her shoulder and saw Ken and another boy standing a little way down the beach holding homemade fishing poles. "Afternoon, Mr. Dickens," he said, with a big old grin on his face. "Afternoon, Ken," I replied, and he and his companion turned and walked away whispering to each other. Jane smiled and looked out to sea. She reached over and took my hand, leaning her head on my shoulder. We sat, not saying a word, just enjoying being close to each other. When the sun was almost down and dark clouds began to hide the view of the sea, I suggested that we leave. We walked down the beach holding hands and stepped onto the dirt road. As we passed the place where I saw the Diablesse, I became uneasy. Jane looked up at me but said nothing. We got to the beach in front of a dome. I took both her hands in mine and pushed her towards me and kissed her. She leaned into me, letting go of my hands and wrapping her own around my neck. Well, how about you come over to my house and I cook you best Caribbean dinner you will ever eat on this island? We got to the house and I went right into the kitchen while she took a tour of the house. I heard her footsteps going upstairs as she walked around, stopping to look at one thing or another. She walked over to a stool that sat at the small counter next to the window. We talked as the scent of the food cooking filled the house and into the yard. After supper, we went into the front yard and sat on the bench in my garden. Little Ken and his friend walked into the yard, each holding a string with the afternoon's catch hanging on it. "This is not a roadway," I said, and Ken walked over holding up the fish, almost splashing us. "A lot of fish, eh?" he said, dangling the fish in Jean's face. She laughed and agreed. Little Ken's friend stood behind him smiling. I pushed the fish away from her face and Ken sucked his teeth. "Well, it's time to cook." And he turned and walked out of the yard, his little friend following. Jane looked over at me. "Why were you so uneasy when we were walking on that dirt road earlier?" I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was for her to think I was some kind of crazy man or something. She waited, and I had no choice but to tell her the whole damn story. I made it clear that I really did not believe in the folktale, but when I could not explain what was happening to me, I went to Allison's grandmother. She did not say anything, but listened with intense interest until I was done. "You don't think I'm crazy, do you?" I asked. She looked up at me and smiled. "No, it's kind of funny though," she said, laughing a little. Then she stopped. "I'm not laughing at you. It's just that where I am from, we have our own superstitions, and some people truly believe in them. Even I can tell you some stories about things that have happened to me." I wanted her to tell me more, but she stopped talking, and the sound of steel drums playing filled the air. They always seemed louder in the early evening. We sat and listened to them until it got a bit chilly. We got up and walked into the house and up to my bedroom. I opened the window and the cool breeze from the ocean swept through the room. Jane sat on her bed and watched as I walked around the room, lighting the candles I had in every corner. Then I walked over to her and pulled her toward me and kissed her. The wind rushed through the trees outside, bringing with it the sound of church bells. Then we lay on the bed and cuddled up against each other. Her breath tickled my chest as she slowly fell asleep. I dozed off, feeling her heartbeat against me. We spent the rest of the weekend never leaving my house. There was no real reason to. We talked and laughed till the sun rose above the green hills that overlooked the ocean. But on Sunday night, we had to part ways. She had to study for an exam, and I had bloody papers to grade.
Ah, Mr. Romantic here. But I wonder, how long will this lovey-dovey stuff last? Maybe the Diablesse have bigger and better plans for old Ian.